With the Planning Committee today, it's a special meeting to discuss the two items on the agenda, which we'll get to in due course. Got a lot of members of the public interested in one or other of those applications, or perhaps both, which we'll be considering today. I think when there are, forgive the phrase, strangers in the building, we need to make sure you understand what to do in the event of the fire alarm going off, that is. And there are the green arrow, well, the green men running, apparently, but don't run, please. And the arrows pointing in the direction of the various exits. And that includes one by that door. And there's another one hidden somewhere over there as well. We're not anticipating a fire drill, so if it happens, then please exit. Staff of the council will assist you if need be. And above all, don't panic. Did I say who I was? I've forgotten to do that. Sorry, I'm Brian Morby, I'm Chair of the Planning Committee. On my right is Rebecca Fahy-Jones, who is clerking this particular meeting, and on her right is Polly Ellis, who's our legal advisor today. On my left is Richard Lewis, who's the head of development control. He's not, he's the manager of something, but I've forgotten his title, but something along those lines. Paul Wheeldon, who's head of transportation and highways, and Norman Jones, who's a team leader within the planning department. There are various others whose names I will forget if I try and recite them. Also hiding over there, for the moment at least, is Duncan Smith, who's the Chief Officer for Planning and Public Protection and currently also for Neighbourhood Services. So he'll assist as and when needed, if indeed needed. Apologies today from two members of the committee, Ron Burnett and Jessica Powell. Are there any other apologies, members, that you're aware of? Nope. Otherwise, we're pretty much all here. Robert Kemp isn't here, is he? But anyway, declarations of interest. Would you, Polly, please tell us what we need to do?
I'd just like to remind members that you need to complete the declaration of interest form in the attendance register folder if you're declaring a personal interest in any application. And the following personal interests have been declared to me. On application 12P00288, application for development at land at Llantarnam, Councillor Ashley has declared a personal interest as he's a member of Cwmbran Community Council and Friends of the Earth Torfaen, which have both been consulted on the application. He is also a member of the Canal Regeneration Group, which has land adjacent to the site. On application 14P00474, application for development at land at former playing fields, Lower Race, Pontypool, Councillor Parish has declared a personal interest as she's a member of Pontypool Community Council, which has been consulted on the application. Councillor Taylor has declared a personal interest as he's a member of Pontypool Community Council, which has been consulted on the application. And Councillor Waite has declared a personal interest as he's a member of Race AFC, the club previously having an interest in the land affected by the application.
Would those members kindly confirm the declaration of those interests, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Fine. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on then to item 3. If I say something about procedure, which applies really to both of these applications. Firstly, the application will be presented, it will be introduced, that is, by the appropriate officer. There will then be speakers who have asked to speak. There are 5 in relation to the first application and 2 in relation to the second. Each of those speakers on this occasion will be allocated 5 minutes in order to say what they wish to say. Some of those will be speaking in support of an objection to the application, and towards the end of those comments there will be an opportunity for those proposing the particular application to respond to those objections. In each case, 5 minutes, and the individuals will need to come into the chamber and sit down there in order to present their objection or their comments to the members of the committee. No one else, unfortunately, or fortunately, if depending on your point of view, is able to speak other than the members of the committee itself and the appropriate officers. I think that's about it, really. At the end of each application presentation and the speakers, members will have opportunity to debate the particular issues and then reach a conclusion, which in some cases requires a formal vote. And in these particular applications, I think, in view of the importance and the interest, there will be a very clear process for taking the members' wishes, i.e. by a vote and show of hands. I think that's probably all I want to say in that regard. So I'm going to kick off application 12P00288, the Lantarnum development, by asking Richard Lewis to just run through the report with some amendments which need to be made.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise for this. Having gone through the report again, there are some corrections that need to be made. So I will take you through this. There's only a few, and I can reference it by page numbers. First of all, on the first page, page 5, you'll note at the bottom, the last paragraph, we refer to a previous application at Malthouse Lane. That's actually a duplicate because it's covered in more detail over the page on page 6 at the end of that particular section. On page 23, near the bottom, we've got a paragraph under highways. It's the second paragraph under the highway section. Regarding the weight limit, we have said that the weight limit will be between Abbey Fields and Woodlands roundabout. It should be from the new junction proposed on Newport Road to the Woodlands existing roundabout. Page 25, right at the bottom of the page, under housing strategy, the second line says 2/3 socially rented and 1/3. That should be 1/3. On page 50 then, the second paragraph down on page 50, again this refers to the weight limit, and the weight limit should be from the new junction on Newport Road to the Woodlands roundabout, not from the Abbey Fields roundabout. On page 56, about the middle of the page, under Crown roundabout, the next sentence down starts with the Newport Arm improvement. That should read the Newport Road Arm improvement. And then on page 57, just opposite, under the proposed heads of terms, in item 2, we make the comment that the low-cost housing, to provide that on-site, wouldn't be truly low-cost because of the cost of or the value of the houses from a marketing point of view, and therefore we could take a monetary sum instead of the low-cost houses. The housing department has advised us that they have now spoken to the RSLs, the registered social landlord, and through messing about with the percentages, there may be a way of doing that. So I'm correcting that by saying that we can now provide the low-cost housing on site. And then on page 63, these are the conditions now. There is a condition that has been omitted. It should have been condition 19. And the condition that we will add as a recommendation will deal with the requirement to carry out the off-site highway improvement works to the Woodlands roundabout and the Crown roundabout, and deal with the realignment of Malthouse Lane. So that will be a requirement that we will add in there to our recommendation. That's all the corrections on the report. But just to advise members as well that we've recently, a resident has recently made a call-in request to the Minister. This means that they have requested that because of certain issues on this development site, they feel that it should be determined by the Minister rather than local planning authority. We've sent the report to the Minister, and he will be making his decision on that. It doesn't stop this committee from making a resolution and from us proceeding with the determination, but prior to issuing that determination, the Minister will make his decision on whether he wants to recover the application to deal with it himself. So we don't know the answer to that at the moment, but that will happen in due course. Thank you, Chair.
Fine. Anybody got any questions on those corrections and information? Happy with that? I should have said about the mobile phone, sorry, my fault for not reminding people. And I haven't checked my own, but I will in a minute. And the other thing is, for those who don't know, the meeting itself is being recorded and webcast. So be careful what you say, I suppose, and just watch out that the camera may be on you if you're pulling a funny face. So I'll say no more on that. Presentation now in relation to that particular item from Rachel McAndrew. Rebecca. Sorry, Rick.
Thank you, Chair.
Is that working?
I think so, yeah. Great, thanks. Just before we start, some of the correspondence that have been received in relation to the proposal that isn't contained within the report. First of all, we've had comments from the Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust. They reiterate their previous comments and request a condition to record the known archaeological features and to identify and record any known and unknown features found during development as attached to any consent granted. And then the authority's ecologist has identified that the site includes 3 seasonal watercourses that comprise a very small percentage of the county-wide watercourse sink. So he says that the environmental statement submitted in support of the application says that the proposed management plan will ensure that the ditches and streams are free from rubbish, pollution or invasive species, and therefore the residual effects after completion of development will at local level be of negligible significance. So our ecologist is satisfied that the mitigation measures proposed address the requirements of the sink policy and the local development plan, so those sinks won't be affected by the proposal. We've also had some more comments from the Cwmbran Community Council. They raised concerns about increasing the population of Torfaen and Llantarnam, and they're concerned that new residents who move into the development will use it as a dormitory settlement. They're concerned about the impact upon the M4 corridor and state that this hasn't been adequately addressed within the application, and that the proposed T-junction, so phase 1, will impact upon traffic flow on Newport Road, increasing the potential for road traffic accidents and a general increase in traffic and the impact upon the existing infrastructure. And then finally, the impact upon the historic park and the conservation area. Thank you. So now I'll move on to the presentation. The site is allocated within the local development plan, which was adopted a year last December. And the policy for that allocation says land is allocated at Llantarnam Strategic Action Area Cumbran for the construction of 450 dwellings, 8 hectares of employment land and a neighbourhood centre and informal recreation provision aided by strategic highway infrastructure and improvements. So that's the allocation. You can see the pink here is the allocation site. Now, the actual application doesn't include all of that allocated land. If you see that line there, I'm drawn across there, that's about the land to the south of that is within the application site. But this sort of finger going up there isn't within the application site, but we consider that to be acceptable. The inspector's report following the examination in public, the inspector considered the allocation, and in confirming that allocation, he says, this is a logical rounding off of the southern end of the town. Whilst I accept that the housing area in the east of the site would impinge on land which formerly contributed to the setting of Llantarnam Abbey, the construction of the A4042 severed that link in landscape terms, and I do not consider that the remaining structures within the area proposed for development would be unacceptably harmed by the incorporation into a more urban setting. He also acknowledges that there are a number of premises offered for sale or to let in the existing business park, but that position is likely to change over time, and the provision of a wider choice of employment sites is key to achieving the Council's overall strategy. So this is the application site, edged in red. You can see the bypass there, Cumbran Drive, and then Newport Road goes up through the site. The existing Blackbirds pub here, Llantarnam Park Industrial Estate, and then the existing Abbey Fields housing to the north, and Llantarnam houses around Newport Road to the south, and some more modern development there as well. So coming on to the application site itself, it's divided up into 4 land parcels. So we've got the cottage site over here. This proposes employment land, which is the purple area to the north, and up to 125 houses here. This is an outline application, so these are the parameters, so it's up to 125 houses in employment. And then we've got the Welsh Government land here in the middle, this blue bit, which would include a neighbourhood centre with retail uses up to 31 dwellings. Then we've got Malthouse Lane North. This is this area here, with up to 230 dwellings, and then down to Malthouse Lane South with up to 64 dwellings. So here's some photos. This is the cottage site, the Welsh Government land, Malthouse Lane North. It's probably worth mentioning at this point that Malthouse Lane North falls within the boundaries of the registered park. So I'll come on to the issues later, but you can see them in the distance, the stone wall which borders that site, Newport Road there. And this is Malthouse Lane South. So you can see some of the stone wall that goes around the Malthouse Lane North there, and this is Malthouse Lane South. Okay, so it's quite a large development which will come forward over a number of years. So phase 1 of the development is going to be the area in blue. So the southern part of the cottage site, the residential land, and the Welsh Government land, which would be the neighbourhood centre and some residential. Then going on from that, then it's the employment land to the north. And then following that, development would move over to the eastern side of Newport Road to the residential development here on Malthouse Lane North, and then into the easternmost part of the site, and then down to the south of Maltese Lane. So this is an outline application with all matters reserved at this point except for access. So here's the access details now. So for phase 1 of the development, which I just explained was the land to the west of Newport Road, there will be a T-junction going in here and going across then to serve the proposed residential land and the land for employment there. And then after that then, when phase 2 is commenced, a roundabout will go in to serve the eastern part of the site. Malthouse Lane itself will also be realigned. So that junction there is pretty dangerous at the moment, poor visibility. So that will be blocked up, and the Malthouse Lane will be rerouted through the site down to that roundabout. So the T-junction's phase 1, roundabout phase 2, and the works to Malthouse Lane are phase 2 as well. So here's some more detailed drawings there. So phase 1, the T-junction, the wall along Newport Road would remain intact, and then the access point would be driven through the Welsh Government land across there. That's the proposed route up to the industrial employment land, and then this goes on then into the proposed residential. And then when phase 2 commences, that T-junction would then be upgraded to a 4-arm roundabout, which would involve the loss of some of that stone wall to create an extra arm then into the eastern part of the site. And you can see the rerouted Malthouse Lane there as well. So there are also off-site highways improvements proposed as part of this development. So phase 1 would be to Woodland Roundabout, which is also known as Rougemont Roundabout. So when you're coming south along Newport Road, the turning left there down towards Newport, towards the bypass, there'd be a 2-entry lane added there. So cars turning left would have their lane as well, dedicated lane there as well for a turning. And then when phase 2 comes forward, there would be a dedicated left turn from the bypass coming up the hill from Newport, turning left onto Malpas Road. And there's also improvements proposed at phase 2 to the Crown Roundabout, which is the roundabout to the north of Burton's Biscuits by Lanfrec for Lanthanum. So highways issues have been quite a big issue with this application. Newport Council objects on the basis that the proposals would be detrimental to the highway network in the Malpas ward. And there's been substantial local objection to the impact of additional traffic which would be generated on the highway network, which already experienced congestion at peak times. However, the authorities, highways engineer and the Welsh Government Transport section do not object, and they consider that those mitigation measures which I ran through with you previously would mitigate against any impact. There are other highways objections as well, but they're detailed in the report. That's the key one, really. And then the other big issue with this application is related to conservation and cultural heritage. So Malthouse Lane, as I said, falls within the registered park. The registered park boundary roughly goes up to opposite sort of Burton's Biscuits down round, and this is the south-western corner of the park here. And then that's Lanthanum Abbey there, so the boundary sort of goes round and encapsulates that as well, with the bypass separating the development site from the actual Lanthanum Abbey now as it stands. There's a stone boundary wall around that land pass as well, which I've pointed out to already. So that runs up Newport Road and along Malthouse Lane. The sections of the road of the wall along Newport Road are listed, but not along the Malthouse Lane section. And then, of course, the site is very close to the Llantarnam Conservation Area, so the boundary for the conservation area actually runs along the northern boundary of the site here, which also sort of follows the path of the driveway down to the Abbey. And then the other sort of significant heritage asset is the Magna Porta Lodge, which is the gatehouse to the driveway to the Abbey. So that's in quite close proximity to the application site as well. Here's some photos. So the top one is the wall on Malthouse Lane. And the bottom photo is looking down Newport Road with the wall on the right. There's the gatehouse, Magna Porta Lodge, which I referred to, which is the entrance to the driveway going down to Llantarnam Abbey. Okay, so the main conservation objections have been the impact upon the registered park, the impact upon the development, the impact of the developments upon the adjacent listed gatehouse, and the loss of sections of the wall which is listed in parts. When we're considering those objections, we need to take note that the principle of development of Malthouse Lane has been established by the LDP allocation. So that's established that there will be residential development within the park, and the removal of sections of the wall to achieve access is also acceptable. Probably worth noting as well that part of the site was actually allocated in the previous local plan as well for industrial use, and indeed there have been consents on that part of the site in the past for industrial use, so that's set that principle. Notwithstanding that, we realise that the development will have an impact upon the registered park and could potentially have an impact upon that, the setting of the conservation area and the Magna Porta Lodge. So mitigation measures need to be in place to mitigate against any impact. We've included conditions within the report which would secure these measures, and I suppose the key one there is the design brief, which would set out how principles for achieving a sensitive layout, a sensitive house design, buffers between the conservation area, Abbey grounds, and the proposed houses themselves. Maintaining as many natural features as possible. So that's required as a condition. And then we come on to the section 106, heads of terms. So the first priority for the section 106 contributions for the site is off-site highways improvements. The second priority is on-site affordable housing. Number 3, education. Priority 4, off-site recreation payment, and then requirement for on-site public open space and play areas as part of the development. There'll be a requirement for marketing of the industrial land to make sure that comes forward, and then review of the viability through the scheme. So through the different phases of the scheme, we can look at the viability. Just to finish off, I know there's some people who are going to speak now. We've had 2 requests from 2 local residents who wanted to speak but were unable to be here. So they've asked if we can sort of make note of their objections as part of this presentation. So one local resident has raised concerns about the traffic impact, how they say it's a busy existing network, and at peak times the highways network is overloaded, and they're concerned about what the impact of the development will be on that problem which already exists. And then another local resident raised concerns about the retail element of the scheme, the neighbourhood centre. They're concerned about antisocial behaviour that could be associated with that provision. They say that local residents don't want a neighbourhood centre. There are shops nearby if they need them, and if there is really a requirement for retail use in Llantarnam, maybe it'd be better located on the nearby retail, industrial park. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Perhaps we could put put the screen back to the map, in case members want to refer to that. Members, I'll give you the opportunity now to ask questions, not comments, just questions of anything in Rebecca's presentation which you're not clear about. Please ask now. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rebecca. Could I be more specific on the land barriers that you referred to? Could you give us a bit more information about that?
On the, sorry?
The land barriers that you referred to earlier.
Land barriers. Oh, the landscape buffers. Yes, so this is quite a good one to show, actually. So if you see, this is the listed gatehouse, and this red line here is the boundary for the site, but also represents the boundary of the conservation area. And this is the indicative layout, and you can see that there's this buffer zone between the orange represents sort of the built development, and then this buffer zone here between the Abbey grounds and the built development would be retained to have that standoff between the Abbey grounds and any proposed housings on that site. You can also see here, as you go along onto the cottage site, this line here is the rear gardens of the houses that exist on Pentra Lane, and the residential development there is pulled away from that boundary, and that's proposed on this indicative layout as a landscape buffer zone as well.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Councillor Crick.
Thank you, Rebecca. You spoke of sensitive house design, and reading the report, there are various comments about the house design, and people have been concerned about red roofs, which would be more significantly obvious than grey slate roofs, etc., and the designs used by one of the builders, which is implied in this report, perhaps not being quite so sensitive to the landscape as others might be. I just wondered what your comments were on that.
I think that we recognise that on the residential areas of the site, so the cottage and any development on Welsh Government land and down to the land to the south of Malthouse Lane, that sort of the standard house design that we're familiar with would probably be acceptable. But I mean, the key concern is Malthouse Lane North. It is within the grounds of a registered park, and the statutory consultees who've got an expertise in conservation are saying, and CADU are saying, you know, if this development goes ahead, mitigation measures need to go into place which are sensitive to the location. So, for example, 2 stories limit. But, as we said, there's a condition on the proposed for any consent granted, which requires a development brief to be submitted before development starts in that area, which has set out the principles. So we'd look at materials, design principles within that, and they would be agreed then before the reserve matters, which would detail the house types would come in. Thank you.
Sir Ashley.
I'd like to reflect, going on from what Councillor Crick was saying, the whole business of the park, which is obviously that particular area, Malthouse Lane North there, is within the kind of, you say in the report, it flows on, as it was. Anybody who's actually walked across that ground will know the sight lines and the feel of that park is a park. And if you build houses in it, they taking an idea of the materials.
Question, please, Councillor.
Yeah, I'm asking about the design brief in terms of houses and hedges and trees, etc. That will be retained to reflect that park landscape.
Yeah, and we would envisage, the landscaping scheme will come forward as part of the reserve matters as well, but we would envisage that the design brief would set out landscaping principles. I mean, we've had details already in terms of additional planting to soften the edge of it. So yes, that's a key point.
Any other questions for clarification? If not, we'll come to speakers. First speaker is Mr. Roger Almer, who's a resident. Would you please come down? No, over. Oh, I see. Oh, you've got it written out as well. Oh, excellent, excellent. Brownie points for that. You will have 5 minutes. We're pretty strict on that in order to ensure fairness, and there will be a 30-second warning, so you can wind up. Thanks.
My observations relate to transport and access to amenities. In essence, I believe the arguments for the sustainability of the development in the planning application are based on incorrect, untested and outdated information. My criteria are those of the local development plan, in which the housing site should be in sustainable locations, well served by essential facilities and accessible to a range of transport modes. And the objectives of Criterion 17 are to develop integrated and efficient transport infrastructure, public transport and communication networks, which are accessible and attractive to all, and encourage a reduction in car use. Public transport. The bus service, as described in the planning application, does not exist. Even at peak times, only 2 buses an hour pass through the area to Cwmbran, that's in the morning. At other times, this service is reduced to 1 hour. There are no buses at all through the centre of this area to Newport during the day. The X3 goes from Cwmbran to Cardiff. The number 23 bus route has been discontinued. The number 15 has been rerouted through the Llantarnam Park trading estate. The only effective means of transport left for people living in the area is the motor car. Another 450 houses will not ease the problem. Roads. The roads within the development area, within it, are not fit for purpose. The main road going through the area, Newport Road, is narrow and badly surfaced. The pavements are poor and dangerous in places, non-existent at a key junction which the presenter has just described as dangerous. Half the street lights are switched off at night. The road is regularly used by very large articulated lorries. Cycling and walking in the area are unpleasant and hazardous, and I do both. The transport surveys cited in the development appear to be out of date by several years and speculative. They do not, as far as I can see, deal with the considerable traffic using Malthouse Lane and Penter Lane through the day. These roads are narrow and have a rural aspect, but nevertheless are busy. Amenities. There are no shops within safe walking distance in the area at the moment, and nothing definite can be promised with assurance by the developer. The nearest convenient shops in Torvine are at Llaneravan and not accessible directly by bus. There is neither a doctor's surgery nor a dispensing chemist, neither a post office nor a bank. The nearest secondary school is over a mile away and is to be demolished. The nearest primary school is between 2 and 3 miles. Few parents would willingly let a child walk or cycle to school given the inadequacy of the roads and pavements. The nearest National Health hospitals are several miles away, not easily accessible by existing public transport for regular visiting. Sustainability, then. The developer argues that the development will be sustainable because most of the people who live in the new houses will be well served by local amenities and public transport. They will either be employed in the development area, so we are led to believe, or the opportunity to do so will exist, cycling or walking to work, or will be able to travel to work or to access amenities not available in the immediate area by public transport. Is this really to be believed? Since local amenities thought to be essential do not exist, and no assurance can be given before development begins that they will be provided, and since there is no adequate public transport to amenities elsewhere, it is difficult to see how it can be argued that the development is sustainable in those terms. Key criteria cannot be met. The application, I believe, should be rejected until these things are resolved. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anne Robinson, please.
Good afternoon. The Welsh Historic Gardens Trust is very grateful for the Council having given us an opportunity to speak to the Planning Committee this afternoon. I'm Anne Robinson, and I'm the Planning Officer of the Monmouthshire and Gwent branch of the Welsh Historic Gardens Trust. The Trust is a charitable trust and set up in 1989 in response to a very real threat to historic parks and gardens in Wales. Its main objectives are to conserve, document and promote historic gardens, parks and the designed landscapes of Wales, and to campaign for their protection. Now, the Trust has been going for 25 years now, and it's just produced a book, which I bought a copy for you. And you will see some of the successes that we've had. But in South Wales, I think the most notable ones are the achievement of the National Botanic Gardens, in which the Trust played a large part, and also the very important restoration of Aberglasney, which I'm sure many people have visited, which I think shows you what you can do if you get a very deserted and derelict site and you decide you really are going to try and do something with it to put it back together again. Now, the significance of Llantarnam Abbey's Park is that the park is registered Grade 2 on the Register of Historic Parks and Gardens in Wales. This is a park that was created in its entirety between 1836 to 7, so it's an example of a 19th century gentleman's park by one Reginald Blewett, but it's actually lying within a much more ancient medieval monastic site, and there's been some reference already today to archaeological remains. So the park and garden form a 19th century designed entity of great historic significance in terms of its layout, its plantings, and, importantly in Wales, where so many parks and gardens have been lost, its survival. It is still there, which is important. Now, obviously, it's been seriously compromised by the driving a road right through the middle of it, but nevertheless, when you go there, it's an exciting place to go to because it has still a great deal of integrity. Now, in making a decision about what happens here, I think it's important that everybody is mindful of the fact that historic parks, registered historic parks, are protected within the planning system because there's a national policy for the protection of these parks and gardens and their settings. So it's not exactly just the park and gardens, it's also the immediate setting, the ambience around it. There's also a policy in your own local plan about the protection of registered historic parks and gardens. Now, these policies are significant because they are material consideration when you make your decision. They are something that you must take into account when you reach your decision. Now, all the specific points that we have made are raised in our letter to the Council of 18th of December. And that letter contains two things. It contains one objection, but it also has a number of observations, some of which I can see you have already sort of begun to look at in your report. The objection concerned the proposed T-junction from Newport Road into the site. And the Welsh Historic Gardens Trust wishes to reiterate that this proposal would seriously affect a registered historic park. This peaceful park needs the respect of the significant surviving fragments, what it's got. One of them is the boundary wall, and if you look in the Cadw list, it talks about the wall as being an integral part of this park. So to drive a hole through it as the visitor starts along Newport Road to experience Lantana Park would not be protecting the park. Okay? And our observations, if I might just say those, concern the layout and style of the proposed development, the need for landscaping. So we urge you, if the development is to go ahead, it should be designed in a way that is entirely sympathetic to the character of the park, as we stated in our letter of the 18th of December. Thank you. I don't know who I give the book to, but whoever would be the guardian of the book may have it.
Councillor Williams?
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah.
Chair, could I ask, I don't know, and I'm not sure whether I'm right to ask, but our first speaker, Mr. Roger Almer, could we have his address so that we know exactly?
Thanks a moment, but what? Why do you want his address?
See where on the map that he lives. I think it's relevant.
Well, I'm going to take advice on that. Hang on a sec. I don't think his actual address, remember this is a public meeting, I don't think the actual address, it being webcast as well, I don't think it's appropriate, unless Mr. Almer is happy to divulge his address, to require him to say precisely where he lives. He's a resident of the area, so that's my feeling, and I'm sort of sticking with that. Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and Councillor Williams is ready. So your 5 minutes starts now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'm just going to concentrate on two aspects of this planning application. One is the historical importance of the Llantarnam Abbey site, and the second one is to just briefly comment on the call-in to the Minister of this application, though it's not specifically this application. As you see, it will be the accumulative impact of residential housing along the M4 development, primarily around Newport. It's right to say that the development is included within the LDP, and for development, the LDP is a guide. It's a guide where sites have been allocated for potential development. What is also within the LDP is a commitment. It's a commitment that says that the historic park and garden conservation area at Llantarnam has been affected by recent developments. The historic character should be recognised and protected in any future developments affecting this area. No ifs, no buts, no maybes, no could be, should be recognised and protected. Torvine, from an archaeological point of view, is recognised as a black hole. Right? There's been so little archaeological research done within this county area that a desktop survey will indicate that there is just no archaeology there. And that's why there's no past record of there being archaeological finds on many of the sites throughout throughout our area. We're not going to hit on a Newport medieval ship, but we do not know what is under the ground in and around a lot of our area. And rudimentary research, right, by acknowledged amateur and some professional archaeologists have shown that there is significant Iron, Bronze Age, Roman, medieval, post-medieval and industrial archaeology on this site. And all this is at evidence down at our local museum. So we have a commitment that we're going to protect this area. And the comments given by the planning inspector, you know, all these have been taken into account, there's nothing there, has been driven by the fact that all the desktop surveys that will be conducted on this area will not give evidence of any archaeology because there's not the background research in there. But there is one significant part of the background research that we're all aware of, and we can all go down there and find the evidence for it. 2014, and apart from being the commemoration of the 100 years since the beginning of World War I, was also the 20th anniversary of the reconstruction of the Folly up at the top of Trevethin there. Think how many events we could have organised around that to have inspired our children to look at local history, design, architecture, the whole lot. Well, on this site, in 2015, we're going to be commemorating the 70th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. On the site that we're about to develop, or propose to be developed, many brave men spent the final weeks of their lives before going off to D-Day to take part in the Victory in Europe campaign. Right? You can see the layout of that marshalling site. You can see where they left this area to go to Normandy to fight, to begin the campaign that resulted in the Victory in Europe. This should be a site that's the focal point of our history for the next 40 years. Our children should be learning about how our past generations stood up, fought for our freedoms, should be researching the kind of social history, employment that they had, that we should be looking at and inspiring future generations to take advantage of a local asset that has not just local impact, but as part of a global event that we should be proud of. The calling of the application to the Minister is quite specific. There is a strategic need to do a review of the impact of residential houses along the M4 motorway. And I know there is significant cross-party support within the Assembly that this strategic review should be taken place. I know that the planning office, some AMs have contacted you and said that this consideration was included in the LDP considerations. It wasn't. You can go on to our MP...
5 minutes? That's the end of the 5 minutes.
Okay.
Councillor David Daniels, please.
Good afternoon, Planning Committee. Sorry, a bit eager.
5 minutes start.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to represent Llantarn's residents. I've got several points to make, many of which have been already covered excellently by previous speakers, but I'll mind them anyway. The first of which is regarding road infrastructure. Relating to the report, the authority's highways engineer and environmental statement considers that overall there would be a negligible increase in traffic flows on the local road network as a result of the development. Yet this contrasts with the opinion of Newport Council and their counterparts in Newport Council, who object to the application on highway grounds due to the inadequacies of transport assessment and the adverse impact of the proposal on the safety of pedestrians, cyclists crossing the Woodlands roundabout. They go on to state that the proposals would be detrimental to the highway network within the Malpas ward of Newport Council. So could officers elaborate on how they have reconciled this difference in opinion? So the next point is on the archaeology of the site, which has been referenced quite extensively and quite well by Councillor Williams. As stated in the report, there is a significant concern about the impact of the proposal on the heritage of the registered park grounds and the archaeology contained therein. Whilst the principle of development of the site has been established, every effort should be made to preserve and protect the unique heritage of the Abbey grounds. So in the report, condition number 41 goes some way towards addressing this by ensuring that any archaeology of value discovered during the development is recorded. But could you please elaborate on what exact procedure will be followed in the event that archaeology of importance is uncovered in the course of Phase 2? In addition, could officers explain what measures will be taken to preserve the boundary wall as much as possible? And can they give reassurances that any section of the wall removed will be restored as much as possible once complete? So my next point relates to affordable housing and the lack of. Whilst I commend officers for their efforts in securing the Section 106 agreement, the percentage of affordable housing is disappointing. Given the need for affordable housing, it is regrettable that officers should have to choose between addressing the transport infrastructure issues caused by the development and providing much-needed affordable properties in the most expensive area of Torvine. I also welcome officers' efforts to secure saleable, affordable housing on-site, as the report originally stated that it would have been delivered off-site due to the difficulty in low-cost housing in an expensive development. This was a concern expressed to me a number of times in the run-up to this meeting, and it's certainly a move in the right direction. However, I feel this difficulty serves to highlight a greater concern that expensive developments might always squeeze the proportion of affordable properties able to be delivered on similar sites, and raises the question about whether this undermines our ability to deliver on affordable housing targets in an area of the borough that needs it most. My fourth point is impact on school numbers. So whilst the report states that it's not anticipated that the development will have significant impact on nearby school numbers, recent developments with Llantarnam Secondary has caused significant concern amongst residents. Have officers factored in the potential residential development of the secondary school site and the impact this will have on the primary school numbers at Llantarnam Primary? So my next point is the access to Malthouse Lane and Newport Road. As raised by residents in the report, the proposed rerouting of Malthouse Lane has caused concern amongst residents and businesses who currently rely on that access to Newport Road. Whilst I understand that the current junction onto Newport Road has dangers relating to visibility, the prospect of heavy vehicles travelling through a residential estate, often at unsociable hours, is a concerning one. What alternative means of access have officers considered to address this concern? So my final point is, could officers please ensure that residents are fully consulted at every stage of the process going forward? Thank you.
Thanks very much. And for the applicant, Mr. Gareth Williams, please. Fine. Thanks very much. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The site is allocated in the adopted local development plan, as Mr. Candrew has pointed out, and the planning application that you have before you is in full accordance with that allocation. The allocation covers a wider area than the previous local plan, but I think the area that is perhaps of greatest interest to many of the objectors is the Malthouse North area, and it's, I think, important to note that that was included in the previous local plan and was allocated for employment, but also that there was a grant of planning permission in 2010, 2010, and in fact there is still a live consent associated with that land. So the principle of development is established both in the LDP, and your council has made several decisions over an extended period of time, dating back to 2000 with the local plan, 2012 with the LDP, 2007 and 2010 with the planning application, which have established the principle of development across this site. My client Redrow, on the back of those decisions, has worked very closely with your officers to prepare this planning application and discuss the details of the application with you to get to this positive recommendation. I recognise the concerns of many of the residents that they've set out, but most of those points that have been raised relate to matters of principle that were addressed through the LDP process, and again, what the inspector said at the, or in his report makes it very clear that he supported the allocation and had taken into account the impact on the historic park. Nevertheless, we recognise the sensitivity of the site and recognise the condition that is recommended to you in relation to the need for a development brief. And again, my client will continue to work with your officers to make sure that we produce a scheme at the reserved matters stage that reflects those. And I think Redrow are a leading house builder. They have a very good reputation for the quality of their schemes. And I think if you look at what's happened in New Inn, I think there's a very good scheme that's been built over the last few years, has been very popular there as well. There are no outstanding objections from statutory consultees. The concerns expressed by Glamorgan Gwent and Cadw are capable of being dealt with by condition. I think balanced against this is the need for new housing. Clearly, this is one of 5 strategic sites in the LDP. It makes a major contribution to the provision of housing and employment and the delivery of your LDP strategy. So if you were to object to the principle of this, you are in fact, I think, objecting to the whole principle of your scheme. You would need to identify alternative housing sites. I mean, this represents approximately 10% of the housing allocated within Torvine. In addition to the provision of housing, there is employment land, there is the provision of neighbourhood facilities, and the transport improvements to Woodland Roundabout there as well in the first phase. Just in response to the points that have been raised to date, like I say, I think most of those relate to issues of principle, which I don't think are for you today. You have got an adopted local development plan. I accept there are points of detail, but I think those can be dealt with at the reserved matters stage. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Next step really is to ask officers to respond to some of the points that have been raised by the speakers. So, Richard, would you kick it off?
We've got a number of officers with us today. If I ask Rebecca to start off with some comments. Adrian will deal with the education issue that was raised, and Paul Wheeldon any highways issues, and Rob, I think, may want to comment on the LDP issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to pick up the archaeological significance issue that Councillor Daniels and Mr Williams raised. As Councillor Daniels mentioned, there's a condition proposed which relates to the archaeological value of the site, which requires that any existing identified archaeological assets are properly recorded and an archaeological watch and brief be undertaken. So basically, Councillor Daniels was asking how are we going to ensure that that those assets are protected. So it's probably worth reading out here what GGAT says in relation to that comment, to that condition. So the request that the condition is attached, these include building recordings of stretches of the park boundary wall, the buildings at Cottage Farm, archaeological work including recording of any remains at Cottage Farm, archaeological work during the removal of drains in the eastern area, an archaeological watch and brief during groundwork so that features and finds located during the development may be identified and fully recorded, and with contingency arrangements to allow sufficient time and resources for the work to be undertaken and report produced. So that's quite an all-encompassing requirement there. And then Mr. Williams also went on and mentioned about the American Army base on the site. GGAT also considered the significance of this archaeological asset. And they say that the direct impact of the development on the remains of the American base will be severe. However, this impact is not sufficient for the current application to be refused, given the current state of survival of the historic remains. The implementation of appropriate mitigation measures for the site, including full archaeological investigation and recording, would ensure that the site was preserved by record, so that proposed condition would cover that. Thank you. Shall I pass to Adrian now?
Thank you, Chair. As regards education, the Forward Plans team worked closely with the Education Department in producing the local development plan. And in answer to Councillor Daniel's questions, yes, we did consider education. In simple terms, there's current capacity in the existing Llantarnam Primary School to accommodate the needs of developments in the area. It's mainly the coal stores and this site as they're allocated. And there's a new 315-place school proposed to be built by September 16, and we don't see why that won't happen. That will create the capacity to deal with every allocated site within the ward. Now, that school has capacity to go up to 420 dwellings, which in theory could deal with another 375 windfall dwellings. So, yes, we are satisfied that there's enough capacity. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thank you. Yes, just in dealing with basically the principle of the development and in relation to sustainability, I think particularly referenced by Mr. Almer. The plan, the application covers the majority of allocation, SAA3, which is included in the Torvine Local Development Plan, which is adopted by the Council in December 2013. The plan was subject to widespread consultation and went to quite a number of council meetings and events during its processing through that. And as part of that development, the allocation is a strategic site within the plan and considered necessary to come forward to deliver the plan's strategy, vision and objectives. The Llantarnam site and corresponding housing and employment matters were discussed as part of the LDP development, and in particular in individual sessions in the LDP examination. A number of, when the plan went through Council on 21st of February 2011, it was widely discussed at that time. Quite a number of questions similar to the ones we've had today were brought up and answered at that time. It was included as part of the deposit plan at that time and taken forward, and went through to the examination, where, the examination, there was a session particularly devoted to this particular strategic action area on Thursday, 25th of April 2013, where again, a number of the aspects, raised, were dealt with at that time. Following those discussions, obviously the Inspector came to the conclusion that it was a sound part of the plan, and also it's a number of aspects of the other plan, there's particular reference to Mr. Williams in relation to other aspects raised, but basically the Inspector considers the plan as a whole, and we consider the plan as a whole, and the allocation is a kind of integral part of that, and is found to be a sound part of that. And the requirement is to deliver the plan, to make sure we're delivering all the necessary parts of the plan. As part of the development, the site, the LDP is informed by sustainability appraisal, where we test sites and policies against objectives and also sustainability objectives. The site scored positive against both of those, and was what, and that's kind of again is covered in all the background documents which attach to the plan. And the widespread consultation, including development framework, which again assisted taking the application through the examination. The application had also been submitted at the time of the examination, so those details were provided to the inspector, so he's fully aware of the details of the application in considering the proposals. And again, basically the summary of his views were detailed at that time. So we feel it to be kind of a sustainable site, delivering well and delivering in line with the plan's objectives and sustainability objectives of the plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and take there were a number of issues regarding highway aspects of this proposal, and I'll try and go in some sort of logical order if I can. The first issue that was raised was regarding public transport to the site. IHT guidelines, which is the Institution of Highways and Transport Guidelines, they talk about distances to facilities, to bus stops, etc. And generally, within 400 metres is desirable, within 800 metres is acceptable, and within 1,200 metres is a preferred maximum. Now, there are bus stops within those ranges to this development site. Service 15 goes to Newport, and it runs every half hour. Service 15 also goes to Pontypool via Cwmbran, and that also runs every half hour. There's also an X3 service outside the site which goes to Cardiff. So my view is that this site is served by public transport, and with all developments, if there is substantial development, there is always opportunity for that to increase, but it is a commercial decision by the bus operator. Second point, if I could come on to, was the condition of Newport Road fronting the site. Newport Road was formerly the A4042 trunk road, and traffic levels have significantly dropped since the introduction of the Malbus Relief Road and Llantarnam Bypass. My view is that the road itself is quite wide and is quite capable of taking the traffic that currently uses it, and is capable of taking the traffic associated with this development. The developer is providing mitigation measures as a consequence of this development, i.e. that means he's carrying out improvements which will cater for the additional traffic catered by this development. There are footways along the existing Newport Road, and there are adequate, street lighting is adequate. There are always instances within the borough that the street lights are turned off, and that was something that the Highway Authority have done themselves. There will be lighting within the development, and what we're trying to do these days is to have sustainable lighting within a development. If I could probably come on now to some issues that Councillor Daniels raised, and that was regarding why we didn't object to this proposal and Newport County Borough did. As an authority, we have to ensure that we have to demonstrate that this proposal would cause demonstrable harm to the highway network. And as I said previously, they have put forward mitigation measures to a number of access routes as a consequence of this development. One of the areas is a significant improvement on Woodlands Roundabout, and another area that they've proposed is improvement to Crown Roundabout. So I'm satisfied that they have provided adequate measures. The other issue as well was that there was a question regarding the assessment year of the traffic impact assessment. We say that the assessment year was 2012, and then you also assess 10 years after opening, which is 2022. Newport have said they object to that on the basis that we've used those assessment years. They would have used an assessment year of 2015 and 2025. Now, they are wrong in doing that, in that it's not in accordance with the guidelines. The guidelines say that the assessment year should be 2012 because that is the year that the application was submitted. I think what they are working on is the starting year possibly, but they are wrong in that. So we do differ, but I think would also like to members to know that Welsh Government didn't object to this proposal, and we had consultants look at the TA initially a number of years ago, and they are separate to us, independent consultants, and they didn't object to it either. And also, just to remind members that this has been through a local development plan process. I think that was it from my standpoint. Thank you.
Just to mention as well, I think Councillor Daniels raised the issue of the wall and sections of the wall that will need to be removed to provide access. You'll note at condition 40, we're looking there for a specification for the removal of the wall, a condition survey to make sure that any reinstatement that's required is carried out properly. So in terms of safeguarding that wall, I believe that condition 40, as well as the development briefs condition, will safeguard that as far as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, members, over to you, really, for comments, questions, please. Councillor Crick.
Thank you. I wonder if we could have some clarification, please, on the advisory notes, particularly with regard to Welsh Water. For example, Welsh Water has advised at point 3, this is on page 69, that there is insufficient capacity to provide guaranteed mains water supply. And extensive off-site water mains will need to be laid. And then under 4 it says the developer is strongly advised to consult with Welsh Water regarding the capacity of the Pontier wastewater treatment works to serve the development. Obviously, with major developments we've got happening in Torfaen over the next years, these are quite important aspects in terms of sustainability, presumably. So it'd be useful to have some more information on that. And the fact that, once again, with another major development, we've had no response from an Iron Bevan Health Board. We're aware, many of us, that there are problems with GP surgeries within Torfaen, and I think we need to have a little bit more concrete information with regard to what health services there's going to be. I'm not so worried about the problems with the local hospitals. We know what's going to happen in the future with those, but GP surgeries are a very grey area in Torfaen, I feel.
I think some of that is to do with the principle of the development. A lot of it was covered at the LDP stage, and those organisations were consulted at that stage. So that in terms of the development numbers that are being proposed, that's really set by the LDP allocation anyway. In terms of the Welsh Water comments, again, Welsh Water would have been consulted at the LDP stage. There are detailed issues with regard to Welsh Water that we're advising the developer to contact them at an early stage. I would think that the developer's already done that, in fact, in terms of developing this, putting in this application. We've not conditioned it, because these are things specifically that the developer will need to agree through and get approval from Welsh Water, and that's why they're in there as advisory notes, not conditions.
Anyone else? Councillor Ashley?
I'm a bit new to this, so pardon me if I ask questions that might seem obvious. I say that because you say that as well. Are we asking for an environmental impact survey on this one, environmental conditions on this one as well? So I've made a note in it. I've read this several times, and I'm just wondering, we've done it with other developments where because of the nature of the site, and I take what was said that the permissions are already granted on this. Looking at the nature of the site, we've got TPOs, I suspect, on some of the trees, and we've got biodiversity and stuff like that all over the site. I'm assuming that one of the conditions is like other sites in the biodiversity, all that sort of thing. We're obviously same as with the archaeology, which you read out quite full. I suspect have we got the same conditions applying to the environmental impact on the site. I'll leave it like that.
Yeah, a full environmental impact assessment has already been carried out on this site, and within that investigation, mitigation measures have been proposed covering ecological biodiversity, etc. And our internal ecologists, NRW, have been consulted on that. What we are saying, in condition 2, the mitigation measures that are set out in the environmental statement, as well as comments from statutory undertakers, we will be looking for the developer to apply those mitigation measures as set out in those documents. Apart from that, when reserved matters applications come in for each phase of the development, there is a requirement for further environmental impact assessments to be done on the detailed applications. So all the way through the process, the environmental information will be dealt with and has indeed been dealt with on the outline application.
Without going, Chair, if I may, without going into acute detail, we're talking about trees and rivers and all the rest of it. Every time it goes on site, then that stuff will be agreed between the parties.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, the beginning of the report, we can't obviously tell you all that is said in the environmental impact assessment, but we've tried to summarise the areas that have been covered, and the detailed report, contains all those details, yes.
Would that include the historical nature of this site that was alluded to by the gardens people?
Yes, it was, yes.
Thank you, Chair. And one of the questions I'd like a bit more information about, and Councillor Daniels raised that question, and that's about the affordable homes allocation. Could we have a bit more information? And I know there's a matrix for the allocation. Could we have a bit more information on that?
Are you happy to answer? Yeah.
The percentage which is required for that area, it is 30%. However, it is due to viability. So we work with the developer to identify what percentage is actually viable for the site to proceed. We do work with the developers to ensure that the site can come forward and we get affordable housing as well. We did mention, Richard did mention earlier on that we looked at the site, and the intermediate element of it is based on somebody being able to afford to purchase a percentage of the property. And the open market value figures that were coming forward, and as Councillor Daniels alluded to, it is quite an expensive area, and for a first-time buyer or for somebody looking to get a first-time mortgage, it's quite difficult for them, and they have to get it on the open market value of the properties. So originally we did look to possibly take some of the affordable housing off-site, but however we would actually use that money within that sub-market area. So although it wouldn't be a brand new property that somebody would be having on site, it could possibly be used to purchase an existing property within the area. I have subsequently worked with the RSLs to try to ensure that we can make sure that we do get some on-site provision, and they will work to lower the percentages, to lower the mortgages which people have to raise to be able to purchase one of those properties, and perhaps offer a different type of product, such as a shared ownership or an equity shared property. So we are working very, very closely to ensure that we can get a balance of maybe on-site, off-site and socially rented on the site altogether. The site, the amount of affordable housing that we can get is down to viability. We do have a viability assessment, and we do have a toolkit which enables us to work out what is sustainable for the developer, but also maximises the amount of affordable housing that we get, and we do that on each and every site that we work with the developers with. So we do our best.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, on condition 7, which is dealing with the neighbourhood shops, how much say do we have on, say, the nature of the shops and so forth, and also if there is, if for example, the shops are not able to be fully rented, would any penalties come to the developer on that matter?
what we are doing here is saying that we will accept general A1 type shops, which covers all sort of retail shops. As long as they comply with that class, then they would comply with that condition. We won't have any say in terms of what types of shops go there. If the developer wants to alter that at all, that anything outside the categories within that condition, he would have to come in with a new application on that part of the site, and we, as a committee, would then have to determine that application separately.
Could I just clarify what actually is meant? Would you class as A1, A2 and A3? What sort of shops would be classed as A1, A2 and A3?
A1 shops would be general retail shops, anything really that sells items, and there's a vast array of those. General retail stores, I would say. A2 would cover professional services and businesses, and then A3 covers food and drink establishments. So within those ranges, that would comprise a neighbourhood centre.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Ashley, then.
There was some reference on here to walking and cycling, and obviously we've had questions on that subject in terms of walking into other places in Cwmbran. And is there any design brief to put linkage into the existing networks? Because there are obvious places where that could be done on here.
Thank you, Chair. Note, Councillor Ashley, that this is an outline application, but there will be a development brief that will include linkages to cycle routes, linkages to development areas, to housing areas and areas of employment, to the lanes within the area. So, yeah, within the in-depth development brief, we will ensure that there are good linkages into all areas.
I only make the comment.
Cycling and walking.
Because you've got a neighbourhood centre, and I mean, if you're going to have a neighbourhood centre, it would make the point to actually have that, so it's linked that way, certainly under active travel.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether we could do this or we could add this to a condition. I heard the point that was made about consultation with residents in the area of the application. I wonder if we could go in dialogue and consultation in the future. Can we put that as a condition?
I don't think that needs to be a condition, because we can do that as an authority anyway. In all the stages of the process, we'd be looking to consult with members of the public and all the statutory consultees. So that is inbuilt, in effect, to the process. And we, as officers, normally exceed the statutory requirements to do that. So we will take that on board, and as this information comes in, we will undertake to involve the public as much as we can.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Cameron?
Thank you. Well, can I just say, I know it's been raised about the road being much less used now, and I'd like to say, as a resident who's been here all their life, that was the main trunk road right through from Pontypool to Newport, Cardiff. And even with the new developments that are on there now, it's perfectly obvious that it's much less used because of the two new roads either side.
Anyone else? Last chance. Are you ready to make a decision? Councillor Seaborn is raising his hand. Is that to say you are ready to make a decision? Go on then.
If there are no more questions, Chair, I would like to move the officer's recommendation subject to the multitude of conditions.
And that includes condition 19, which was omitted from the written report. Yeah. Okay. Is that seconded? That's seconded. Does anybody wish to submit an amendment? Nope. you ready to vote on the motion? Okay, all those in favour, please show. That's approved. Thank you very much.
Jelly legs.
Okay, I think we're now ready to resume. For all those people who've joined the meeting for this particular item, can I just say that there are no fire drills planned for this evening, so if the fire alarm goes off, it's important that we take notice of it, basically, and we'll assist as necessary, but there are various exits through which are designated fire escapes, so, but let's hope that's not necessary. Item 4 then is the development at the former playing fields lower race body pool, and Adrian is going to make a presentation, and I'm being advised. Oh, and Duncan Smith, the Chief Planning and Public Protection Officer, has declared an interest, a personal interest, and potentially prejudicial interest, and therefore he's left the building, in fact, I think. So he's no longer here. Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can all hear me. Right, I have no corrections, but I've got 2 items of late correspondence. The first one is from the Cumnissacoy Neighbourhood Action Group. I'll refer to as CumNag, it's easier. Their substantive objection is listed on page 102, and they were sent the latest mining report and the viability evidence, and their response is an email. It's quite short, so I'd read it. I have read the documents and have no further comments to make, given that you are in discussion with the footballers as they are satisfied with the proposal. One of CumNag's concerns is that under the application it's not proposed to replace the football pitch.
Can you just, I was searching for the page and I didn't really listen to what you were saying.
Their comments at the bottom of page 102, Chair. I mean, there's a short, I can read it out. The Cumnissacoy Neighbourhood Action Group requests further information regarding the recent shallow mine working investigations, remediation costs and the viability assessment to justify not replacing the playing field, which was subsequently provided to them, and that's what they've just responded to.
And that the email was saying?
That they are satisfied with the documents, no further comments, and in effect they're saying that because we're in further discussions with the Footballers Club, they are satisfied with that part of the proposal.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. The second further correspondence is from the Coal Authority and their substantive objections on page 96. And the Coal Authority's original objection was twofold mainly. One was that when you build over the coal resources, I'll show you where the coal is in my presentation, you should consider the prior extraction of coal, and that wasn't done at the time of the application. And the second part of the application is their policy is not to build over mine entries, and there's an air shaft in the proposal that the applicant has proposed to build over. So they were sent this further mining information, which did consider the prior extraction, and in effect their letter has recognised that and hasn't commented any further. But in effect they're still maintaining their policy objection to building over what's known as the northern air shaft, and I'll show members where that roughly is on the layout. And obviously that matter's been dealt with in my report as well, Chair. Right, thank you, Chair. Right, moving on to my presentation. I'm a bit slower than most because I'm left-handed and this lectern is set up for right-handed people. Here I start. So the application is for 31 gypsy and traveller pitches on the site of the former Race AFC football pitch, which is this area here. It's mainly that flat land, which is the previous football pitch site. Now this site is located just outside the urban boundary. I'll show you that when I show the local plan, but in effect it's at the race on the hill down towards the 472. So there's Pontypool College. It's adjacent to the council's existing Shepherd's Hill Gypsy Traveller site, which is there. And then there's a scattering development. There's also a gypsy caravan there as well in a plot that's not shown on the map. And this is sort of Lower Race. Now this plan shows quite well the the footpaths that are proposed to be improved. This is an existing public right-of-way, which isn't in good condition, but they're proposing to surface that and put sort of bicycle barriers here to prevent unauthorised entry by motorcycles and a little bollard there. And the other point in the report, I do mention that you can't see it on the ground, but there's an old changing room here that's proposed to be demolished and surrounded by conifers. I'll show you that in photographs. And this is the route of the old tarmac drive that can no longer be seen, but it must be in there. And the issue there is it's quite close to existing trees, and if it gets grubbed out, we want to make sure that the tree roots aren't damaged. Get next. It's done it. Right. So this is the layout plan. I've actually used the landscaping scheme, so it kills two birds with one stone. But basically, this is the site now. So the site entrance is in through here from what's the existing Lower Race Road. The proposal is, because it's on shallow mine workings, is to grade this area. That's basically pump a form of cement into the ground that stabilises to a satisfactory level the ground substance to make it safe to an acceptable level. Now, the proposal is for 31 pitches in 3 phases, a phase or yards, which is these blocks here. So phase 1 is around that yard, phase 2 is around that yard, and phase 3 is around that yard at the top there. And there are about 10 or 11 pitches on each. Now, each pitch, it's probably best if you look at this area 10, it's less confusing. But that's the typical pitch layout. Consists of a single-storey amenity block, that's that little A. An area to park 2 caravans, which is where the number 10 is in effect. So you can put a mobile home with 2 caravans. We're limiting the application to 2, and we'll talk about that in the conditions. And there's 3 parking spaces, which are these 3 sort of rectangles around the amenity block. A children's play area is proposed, which is actually going on this open space here within phase 1. There's areas of formal open space, so there's one area there and an area there. And obviously the area surrounding the pitches itself will be a form of open space. Now, there are some trees removed, which are these red dots. So there's those trees. And to demolish, I'll show you the picture in a minute, the remnants of the changing room, the conifers have to be taken out. And there's an odd tree going there, and these trees are obviously too close to the boundary there. But obviously this is the landscaping scheme and shows what they're proposing. So landscaping within the development and replacing that, the conifers, with a more sort of indigenous copse of trees. As I said just now, vehicular access is from the Lower Race Road, which is this way. And I've mentioned earlier the improved public footpath, which will start here and work that way. That's both to get residents up to Blindair Road and the college, but also to link to the adjacent Shepherd's Hill site, where a community facility known as the Pod exists. Now, here's the local plan. Sorry it's confusing, but hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your questions. There's the allocations, which is the 872 policy. There's the Pontypool College, which is an allocated housing site, assuming post 16 goes ahead. This red line is the current urban boundary, and as you can see, the site is a specific allocation outside of the urban boundary. Now, as part of the plan, we'd allocated a replacement playing field, which is this yellow area here. It's the CF6 policy. So that's the replacement plan. Now, this is where it gets a bit difficult to see, and I apologise for that. I'll follow it now. This dark line here is the extent of the coal field, and it works back this way to my left. And as you can see, the site lies within the coal field. Now, I think as members know, within 500 metres of an urban boundary is a presumption against coaling, which is these 2 lines here. You can see that dark line there and that dark line there. That's basically 500 metres from this urban area, so it sits within there. And the other straight, I don't know if you can see like this rainfall type shading. I'll come to the edge of it. The edge of it very proportionally skims the edge of the site. Now that's a safeguarding zone. Basically the coal outside this 500 metres is sitting here. And we've put a safeguarding distance on it, and this site is just on the outer edge of the 500 metres. So when I talk about that in the report, I obviously say in the report I consider that appropriate, and at 500 metres it's not going to sterilise this, because that's something we have to take into account. Right, so here are some of the pictures. This is the Lower Race Road here. There's the existing access and the tarmac drive going along. This is the existing frontage. That's the playing field in here. There's the conifers I talked about. You won't see it because the changing room is hidden in behind them. And that's the northwestern boundary I talk about. This is the southwestern boundary. and there's the existing Lower Race Road. I'll talk a bit about landscaping on this frontage with the next slide, but most of the landscaping we're looking at, that you can view the site from Tumpath. It's always raining when I go here. It must be when I do site visits. But Tumpath's the other side of the valley over here, and the views in would be from there. And obviously you get views into the site from the road here. But you can see the existing screening to the north there is quite adequate, and this is part of the existing screening to the road as well. Right. This is a view from the road into the site. That's the back of the site, and this is the part where we're conditioning for more landscaping. None has been proposed at the moment, but as you can see, it's quite open. You can view right to the back of the site. The access will be in here. I mean, the actual pictures themselves are 25 metres back from this road as part of the drawing anyway, so they're set back quite a way. So there's an opportunity to landscape this open area here to reduce the impact from that view. Right, one of the issues raised by one of the objectors, I think that's also on page 102, is the gentleman who lives in the caravan here is concerned about overlooking. So this is the aspect of that northern boundary. It's probably thicker here, but he's as a part of that and as part of the work to protect the trees, the original layout was 3 metres from this boundary. We've got the applicant to change it, so that boundary is now 10 metres away, and we're also conditioned, as part of this further landscaping, that an indigenous hedgerow gets planted here as well. As you can see, the site is above it. I think it's about the level of the roof for those caravans. Now this is probably that's the changing room there. It's quite derelict now. There's not much of it left, and these are the conifers, and the applicant is proposing to take those conifers down. You can see some landscape, I don't know if you can see it, but there's some landscaping there, so the impact of that removal is mitigated by that, but those conifers are proposed to come down. And this is a good example where we would like further landscaping, because this is quite an open part of that landscaping towards Tumpath on the other side of the valley. So that's the area really we're talking about, a natural hedge being planted here. Now the main issues from the objection are the principle of development. Now, the Council has statutory duties as a local planning authority to make appropriate provision for gypsies and travellers in its local plan. So in the local plan, we did the survey, we've allocated the sites, and that's what we've done in the local plan. Now, the Council, wearing another hat as a housing provider, has got a statutory duty to make provision where it's not met by the private sector. So in the need we identify was 20 to 42 units, 10 are proposed by the private sector, proposed by a gypsy traveller himself, which leaves up to 32 for the council to pick up, and that's what this proposal is addressing. As an aside, the application is for 31 dwellings, not for 32, but that's so close to the top parameter of 42 that I consider that acceptable. Now again, the location of the development, the numbers on the site have gone through an independent local plan process. An inspector has looked at those issues, certainly the issues of community cohesion, all of those were looked at. Its location itself have all been looked at, and the inspector found the site to be acceptable. Other matters are these technical details around minerals and site remediation. I'm satisfied that this site will not prejudice coal, so that's the coal safeguarding issue, which is that area 500 metres, never get it right, to the west. And the other matters is pre-extraction, which basically, if you build on an area of where the coal field is, you've got to consider taking out. And in the report, I address that. And what I'm saying is it's not really environmentally appropriate to pre-extract that coal. The best remediation method is grouting. That's what's proposed. So that's all in the report. The main issue is this air shaft. As a planning authority, I'm recommending a precautionary approach to the air shaft. So if it's not found, that the applicant comes in and reinforces the ground. Now, to me, that's reinforcement to an acceptable level. I think this difference comes really from national policy, where the coal authority's objection to building over an air shaft or any mine entry, even if it's filled in, is absolute. Their policy is against it, where national policy is more flexible. So I'm talking about Welsh Government policy and Minerals Technical Advice Note 2. And that basically says assess it, and if you're satisfied that the remediation is acceptable and reduce the risk to an acceptable level, it's okay, and that's really what I'm saying as a planning officer to you. The other issue is the loss of the playing field. And if we start, there's two issues here. First, the loss of the playing field was addressed by the local plan and the inspector. We're building on the playing field. Its loss is accepted. Fields in Trust have accepted the loss because the remediation is likely to be £800,000, and so it's unlikely the playing field would ever come into use. The second issue is around national policy, which requires if you build on a playing field, you should really replace it. And that's what the local plan did in policy CF6 in allocating the nearby site. And as also, a development of 31 dwellings generates a need for recreation in itself, and we normally ask for a financial contribution per dwelling to go towards recreation in the area. However, in this instance, the applicant has provided a viability assessment, as any developer can, and which shows that the cost of providing the playing field would make the site uneconomic. And in that instance, my recommendation is, on balance, that that's acceptable because of the need to make provision for gypsy travellers. Now, it's been mentioned, it was mentioned by Cumnag about the council's other work with Race AFC. It's important I point out that today you're being asked to approve an application without a replacement football pitch and no financial contribution. Yes, that work is happening, but that's an aside with the council wearing another hat. Now, highways and access. In the report, the highways officer says that Lower Race has deficiencies, but a satisfactory vehicle access can be provided, and the footpath improvements to the rear make the proposal acceptable to the highways engineer. Now, as regards residential and visual amenity, the site is generally designed in accordance with Welsh Government Design Guide for gypsy traveller sites, but as I've said earlier, in our assessment of the application, there's a need for more boundary landscaping, and we also wish to control business use of the site by gypsy travellers, the amount of cars parked and the size of vehicles parked on the site, and the actual number of caravans who can occupy the site, so they've all been recommended to you as conditions. Now, other considerations, leaving aside the issue of the playing field, the site is generally Section 106, Supplementary Planning Guidance, compliant. Whilst the council can't enter into a Section 106 with itself, a playing fields being, a children's play area is being provided in accordance with those standards, open space is being provided, community facilities have been addressed by using the pod next door. But there is a recommendation for some further design details of lighting. Bats use this area. We know they're going to put street lighting on the site, but we don't know how strong that street lighting is to see if it affects bats, so that's been conditioned that we find out how strong that lighting is and make sure it doesn't affect bats. And there are issues about surface water details as well. They're minor issues, but they've all been recommended for condition. So that's my presentation, Chair.
Any questions at this stage? Councillor Waite.
Could I ask Adrian, can you confirm, Adrian, with the new footpath that's proposed from the new development site, Lincoln Shepherd's Hill, up through Cottage Gwent, have you got street lighting on that footway?
No, that's not being proposed.
How do you think families are going to manage in the dark nights?
Well, it's to me that's acceptable because it's school times, etc. And also that is an appropriate level. That's most rural roads are like that in rural areas anyway.
I think you've done this before, but 5 minutes limit.
Yeah. That one.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm Jack Hanbury from the Pontypool Park Estate. We have two interests. One, we are the surrounding landowner on all sides of the Shepherd's Hill site. The Shepherd's Hill site was gifted by this estate to the people of Pontypool for a recreation ground in the 1920s, and that included the entirety of the site, the historic Shepherd's Hill development and the proposed site. So the whole of that area, both the old site and the new site, was given by this estate. And so there are various issues relating to that original gift which concern me. And then just as neighbour, I'm affected, the estate is affected by it. So that's just where I'm coming from. And just to clarify, although Mr. Wilcox has referred to the applicant, of course the applicant is the council. I mean, it's the council making its own application, just different departments. I was also, for clarification, sent something by Mr. Wilcox this afternoon. Forgive me, I can't just see it, but I don't think it's relevant to what we're saying today. I gather it deals with one of the issues. Key things I would rather not be here, so to speak, because I appreciate that the Council does have difficult statutory obligations in the relation to this provision. And the proposed extension to Shepherd's Hill, this proposed north extension, it may not be the only site that's suitable, but I suspect that it is one of the sites that might have been considered in order for the Council to meet its obligation about the provision, the gypsy provision. But I also have great sympathy and respect for the concerns of the local residents. I think their concerns are reasonable. And these concerns, I regret, relate in part to the management of the existing Shepherd's Hill by the Council, by Torfaen Council, over the last 40 years. And I would just hope that the Council would accept that there have been issues. For example, the site itself, there have been issues about the management of the site. We're all aware of that. And the Council may have created a nuisance to its neighbours by failing to contain the site, and that of course affects us as neighbour. The surroundings of the site are covered in litter. The fences around the site are lying on the ground. The site spills over, and it is creating, the current site at Shepherd's Hill is creating, I'm afraid, a nuisance. The Council has even allowed somebody to build on its own land at the north end of the proposed development site, and the north end of the development site has had ponies grazing on it without payment for about 40 years. So the Council hasn't really been looking after its own ground, both the existing Shepherd's Hill site and the proposed extension, quite as well as it might have been, and it would be wonderful if the Council could just acknowledge that. Because even though the land was given by the Principal for recreation, that covenant was actually waived to allow the original Shepherd's Hill development to go ahead in 1975. But the 1925 covenant for the entirety of the site does still contain fencing covenants. And the Council, in its management of the site, of its existing Shepherd's Hill over the last 25 years, as I said, hasn't, I don't think, met its common law or its statutory obligations in terms of management, nor indeed has it met its contractual obligations to this estate in terms of the restrictive covenant on the existing Shepherd's Hill site. And those covenants were reinforced when Shepherd's Hill was built, and the Council doesn't comply with them. So it could be one of the reasons why there's such concern about the extension to Shepherd's Hill may relate to the Council's management over the last 40 years. And if the Council pleads poverty, that isn't desperately impressive, because we all have to pay our bills and we all have to meet our obligations. And the Council's only too keen to enforce its own actions against others, and it would just be so kind if it could look after its own ground properly. Therefore, you've heard that this is a council development, and this council can't put in the normal Section 106 restrictions against itself, so to speak. I therefore suggest that if the council does giving itself planning permission for the Shepherd's Hill extension, and I suspect it will, that this should include some kind of guarantee that the council will meet its future management obligations better than it has in the past. The problem is that promises from the council just don't mean anything, because the council's already got obligations to the existing Shepherd's Hill site, and if it doubles the area of the site,
that's the end of the 5 minutes.
It could just double the problem. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Howell. Thank you. Lovely, thank you. Thanks. Yeah. I should have said Mr. Howell is an officer with the Housing Department of the Council.
Thanks very much, Chair.
5 minutes start now.
Okay. I just wanted to make a couple of further points in support of the application today. As has been mentioned previously, the Council has statutory duties to make provision for Gypsy Traveller community within the borough. The Gypsy Traveller Needs Assessment that was previously undertaken as part of the development of the Local Development Plan identified the need for the provision of additional pitches. There are concerns about overcrowding on the current site, as well as the need to address health and safety issues due to mining subsistence on the site. The proposal is to develop the current site on a phased basis, whilst the application is for 31 pitches. Initially, we're looking to introduce only an additional 10 pitches. The first phase will allow for natural expansion based on the existing community on the site to address overcrowding. The site is the preferred option for the local Gypsy Traveller community, who themselves are well established and have strong links with healthcare and education provision in the area, and in their experience there is a comparatively high degree of tolerance between them and the wider community. The proposed new Housing Act, which will be introduced in April this year now, will require councils to undertake further Gypsy Traveller needs assessments and to make appropriate provision for local and transient communities. Planning approval is being sought, which, if approved, will provide the Council with the ability to access Welsh Government funding from April 2015. And without that provision, we will not be able to apply for funding from Welsh Government. Sorry, without planning permission, we won't be able to apply for the funding from Welsh Government. The proposed development has been the subject of scrutiny through the local development plan process, which included a review by the independent inspector, who concluded the site was appropriate an allocation within the adopted plan. It was hoped that part of the development there would be an opportunity to provide additional recreational facilities on the site, but these costs have proved to be prohibitive. And I suppose in response to the previous speaker's comments, I can't take responsibility for the last 40 years of managing the site, but I've taken responsibility over the last couple of years. I can confirm that we've recently appointed a full-time Gypsy Traveller liaison officer within the last 6 months, who does spend significant time on the site liaising with both the local Gypsy Traveller community and the wider community. I do acknowledge, I suppose, that there have been some issues of nuisance and rubbish and issues of concern relating to fencing on the site. But I can successfully, report today, we have been successful in securing Welsh Government funding, which we'll be able to access this year to improve the fencing and drainage on the site. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks so much. So, Adrian, would you mind commenting on what the speakers have said, if any?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think a lot of Pontypool Park's concerns are management issues between the council and its landowner and the park themselves. And I think, as Mr. Howell said, one of the issues was the fencing, and it appears that's been addressed separately to the planning application. The same, in my view, as well as management. You know, they've appointed a management consultant to deal with some of the issues. I think the main area I'd like to comment on from the park is about assurances that the council will make sure that the public open space, the children's play area, the landscaping and the footpaths are maintained. We have a written assurance from the Housing Service that will be so. And in addition, there are conditions. So, for example, Condition 11 on landscaping, Condition 19 on public open space and children's play areas that require those facilities to be maintained in perpetuity in accordance with agreed maintenance schedules and timetables. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, Councillor Waite.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got quite a few points that I would like to bring up, if I could. If you read through the report, we've had from Pontypool Community Council, they have objections to this development being put there. The Coal Authority, on pages 96 to 97, talk of high risk subsidence, and they are unable to give any sort of guarantee, no matter whatever work we seem to put in there. This is just going to disappear. If you look at Fields in Trust and Sport Wales, they have priced it as £800,000 just to grout the pitch. But even after that has been done, the Coal Authority still says that it is at risk. I don't think that this development is going in the right place. There's been land drain surveys going on down there. The land drains, as I understand it, have just completely collapsed, which go into the old football pitch. And the flooding on the race road is absolutely appalling. The Fields in Trust also suggest that the council should put a replacement pitch, which we've just been told now that that's on hold again. Andrew just talked about a new footpath to be installed, but again, as I just mentioned, there's no mention of any streetlights. Now, I would challenge anyone for their wives or their daughters or their children or grandchildren to walk this path. It goes through an old wood, and it is pretty horrific for people to be expected to walk up there at night time in particular. I know there's a lot of issues with highways. I know that the highways officer himself, Paul, has said that he has concerns on the race road. I see these mums coming out the gypsy site at Shepherd's Hill with pushchairs and children holding hands, walking down that road. There's no pavements, there's no traffic control whatsoever on that road, and to develop another site that is just going to add that, besides the transport and all the rest of the things that's going on down there. I've been approached by people living in Shepherd's Hill. 4 or 5 families have approached me, and they are very, very concerned about the gypsy proposal going ahead anyway. They've said that the travelling gypsies that come on the site once or twice a year, they seem to be very disruptive, and that's the only time we ever get any sort of problems with the police around Cumbernaskoi. But there has been issues, and I think Neil Howells will agree with me when we've had to speak to the manager of the site, who is trying to deal with a lot of the difficulties that go on up there. But I'm not going to be able to support this planning application on the grounds of health and safety for the people in Shepherd's Hill. And if this proposal does go ahead, I think that we are making a rod for our own back. Surely to goodness in Torvine there must be some other piece of ground somewhere in Torvine without having the cost of what we're talking about, £2 to £3 million just to stabilise the ground. And I don't think we'll ever stabilise the ground, because there's been 200 or 300 years of industrial mining, shallow mining, open cast mining that's been going on there for the last 200 or 300 years. And I will not be supporting this application on the grounds of health and safety for the constituents that I represent. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Neil. Anyone else? Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I sympathise with Councillor Waite, especially in regard to the dangerous road and no lighting. I hear what you say, Adrian, about the rural areas and all lit. But this is a development, not development. The Gypsy Traveller site is going to be enlarged, so there'll be more people, as the council has pointed out. I have got serious concerns about the lighting and the safety there. I take on board as well that in the past, what Neil says is that Gypsy Travellers coming on an ad hoc basis have caused disruption, but I'd like to think with the information that Neil Howell has presented to us, that we have now a Gypsy Traveller liaison officer in place, that will possibly help that situation. We're in a difficult position here because we are on a bound, and in fact we must do it very, very shortly. We must provide provision for Gypsy Travellers. Neil has also highlighted that if we turn down this application, we lose funding. So I think we're in a real difficult situation here, but I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chair. This field hasn't been used for some 18 years, and it was stopped because of the subsidence, with some 25 people running up and down and playing football. Can you give me any guarantees that all the work that's going to go ahead with the grouting is going to be suitable to place families, some 32 families on there, to live and to play? And also with and I support Councillor Waite, and I don't think I can support this application on the grounds of health and safety.
I think there was a question there, and so Adrian.
A few, Chair, if I start going through them. First of all, I believe I need to correct Councillor Waite. The cost of remediation of grouting is £800,000 estimate, not 2 to 3 million. As I went through in my presentation, I think the matter of risk is really one of assessment. The Coal Authority, as I said, view on risk is absolute. With national policy, and I've quoted in the report, if you look at page 92, there are several paragraphs there. I don't know if members want to turn to that page. Okay, I'll wait to there. So it's halfway down page 92 where it says paragraph 244 to 253. So it's those. I'm just going to paraphrase in these next few paragraphs. Now, as I said, Welsh Government national policy in MTAN2 is more flexible and considered. And that really says when there's land instability, it must be considered to reduce the risk of substance. And then paragraph 243 later on says remedial or preventative action may be required to protect public safety and prevent such a situation arising. In the penultimate paragraph 247, it says in the treatment of the underground voids to reduce the risk of subsidence to an acceptable level may be necessary. And then later on in that paragraph it says a full assessment is needed to consider alternative treatments and the environmental impacts. So, and then last, if you go halfway down page 93 in paragraph 252, it says where acceptable measures could overcome instability, planning permission may be granted subject to conditions specifying the necessary measures. Now, as a planner, I'm saying based on national policy, I consider with the amount of grouting and the proposals and the amount of work that's going to go in to make this site safe, that to me that the measures are acceptable. That's that issue. Councillor Waite talked about the condition of land drains. Condition 20 that's before you talks about a CCT survey. So that's, I'll try and find that page for you. But, yeah, that's on page 117, condition 20 there. Talks about the requirement for a CCT survey to ensure that grouting doesn't affect it, that if it's damaged, that culvert gets repaired, even considered to be brought to the surface. So that's a detailed matter we'll have before any development can commence. I'll pass to Paul on the highways issue. I've said what I think on that. The last point I think was management, and I think you've recognised this as well, and said what Mr Howell said, that the council has got management regime in place. And I think the other important point is a lot of the issues for the local people are about unauthorised camping in this area, and with a new site there should be less unauthorised camping because the visitors to the site will have somewhere to go because there's now more capacity. So I don't know if it passed the point.
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer Councillor Waite's question, Councillor Waite is aware that I too am concerned about the highway layout within this particular area. But again, it's awful difficult because if we oppose something, we have got to quite clearly show demonstrable harm on the highway network. That means that we've got to demonstrate, and it's generally through an accident record or a personal injury accident record, that you can show that there is demonstrable harm on the highway network. That there isn't an accident record in this particular location that would clearly demonstrate harm. I do share your concerns, and I really do. But again, there's this mitigation question, and with all the best will in the world, we cannot make these people use this footpath, but we can provide it, and hopefully they will use it. In rural areas, and there are quite substantial rural areas within Torfaen, you will generally find footways that are unlit. We cannot make people use them, and generally, at night time, if people do tend to use these footways that are unlit, they make provision for it, i.e. they take torches with them, etc. So there are ways that they can help themselves. Another thing to remember is in rural areas where they are lit, they are subject to vandalism. So they become unlit in any event. So while I do share your concerns, I just like to tell members we've really got to try to demonstrate, if we oppose something, that there is real significant, is the key thing, harm to the highway network by that proposal being there. And in this instance, even though I share your concerns, I really don't think from a highway standpoint that we could show that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Waite, let's see if anybody else wants to talk before you. Anybody else wish to comment? No? In that case, Councillor Waite?
I would just like to respond. Adrian was right when I said £800,000 for Groughton. But if you read in the drainage report, the officers here have said that they've got no idea where the drains are under the football pitch. There'd have to be a survey conducted to find out where they were, and with the added development of the footpath, that's just going to escalate this price. We are talking £800,000 just for Groughton. For all this additional work, we're going to be talking about £2 to £3 million to develop this pitch. And I think that there are other places in Torfaen where you don't have to spend this sort of money to provide a safe environment for Egyptian travellers. And like I said, with Paul, what Paul just said, I'm in full agreement with what Paul is saying. But this road is a very dangerous road. And when it rains, because of the drainage issues that's been on the race road for the last 10 or 15 years, as soon as it rains, that road turns into a river. It's just like a river going down there. And for you to submit more people to this site, or to the site just below it, with more vehicles, there's going to be more people walking down this lane. I hope that there's not going to be a fatality waiting to happen, because I wouldn't want anyone to get killed before we can say that, oh yes, it is a dangerous road. I would rather for us to find another location for this site, because this site is not appropriate for families of 31 and 32 caravans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, Councillor, I understand what you were saying. I guess the total cost of the site is £3.7 million. That does include a sizable contingency for both design and build. So if there are extra costs involved, with, say, strengthening the ground around the northern adit or dealing with the drain, it's within that budget that's been identified by the Housing Service. Now, As regards alternative sites, this is an allocated site in the local plan. These issues of location have been dealt with. The inspector was fully aware of all the mining issues. The majority of the mining reports that came with the planning application were in front of the inspector. These issues are taken into account. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 99, National Resources Wales, I believe it's the 6th line down, desk study or information providing details on this potential risk may have been completed, but this has not been submitted to support this planning application. And then further on down, without these conditions, the proposed development on this site poses an unacceptable risk to the environment, and we would wish to object to the application. Can the officers explain that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. A risk assessment was provided with the details. I'm not quite sure why the NRW didn't see it, but there's a whole section on risk. I think so that's initial risk of building here in the environment. I think their concern goes on a bit more. There are still data being collected on mine water and things like that. I think that's the outstanding risk they're talking about. And again, that's conditioned. So I think it's condition 25 talks about that risk assessment being finalised. Like we've only just started collecting the borehole data on water levels and gas levels in the mine. And I think it's that type of risk that they say they haven't got. Certainly there was a risk assessment in the submitted application that covered a lot of the issues we've talked about today.
Anyone else? Councillor Parish.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've got concerns about the instability of the site. If we go back to page 93 and went to the third paragraph down, paragraph 252, and third line down, when planning permission is granted, a notice should be issued to inform the applicant that the responsibility and subsequent liability for safe development and secure occupancy of the site rests with the developer and or landowner. It should also advise the applicant, although the local planning authority has used its best endeavours to determine the application on the basis of the information available to it, this does not mean that the land is free from instability. I mean, that doesn't sound very safe to me.
I think, Chair, we have to put that in context. I think that's a caveat that the local planning authority used to make sure that if anything does happen, that, they are covered. But what I'm saying is I'm satisfied with the information before us, the method of remediation, the amount of remediation they're going to do, the site will be made safe to an acceptable level. I mean, that's just a catch-all caveat.
Anyone else? Can I just say that we are concerned about the fact that some local residents use the road rather than the footpath, and we're trying to encourage them to use the footpath and obviously extending it, but we're also saying that it won't be lit at hours of darkness, which seems to me like a discouragement to use the footpath. And I wonder whether we can add an amendment to suggest that, in fact, provision of low-level lighting for the footpath be considered in the interests of encouraging people to use it and obviously in the interests of safety of the residents. So I don't think I can move an amendment from the chair as such, but I do think that might be something we would wish to ask the officers to look into further and come back to us in due course. Taylor.
Chair, I'm exactly the same as you and Councillor Stuart Evans. The amount of money that's being spent on this area, and then we're talking about lights for people to walk. I think, and I would like to propose that these street lights for this pathway be put into this planning. I think, it's paramount. You're having more caravans and people around there. And I think lighting, especially today, I know we're cutting back on lighting, but we can still provide a low lighting system there for these people. So I would like to put that recommendation in.
Can I just be clear about the wording? Because I was suggesting that we add a condition asking that before the development take place, that a review in respect of the footpath, proposed footpath, be conducted in order to try and ensure that there is low-level lighting rather than high-level lighting to assist pedestrians, and whether that is feasible or not. And for that to be subject of a further report back to this committee in due course. So that condition to be attached prior to the development taking place.
So can I just comment on that? I think I don't have any problem with doing that in terms of a review, just to bear in mind there may be other consultations we need to carry out, such as with the ecology officer. That is a dark corridor in terms of wildlife and whatnot. So whilst we can put it on there, there needs to be a realisation that there may be other reasons why that may not. So we can certainly investigate the feasibility of that.
And that's why I'm asking for a condition that it be subject to further consideration rather than a definite decision, just in case that those sorts of considerations apply.
I hesitate to come in on this, but I will do on that sense that there is lighting that can be done at a very low level that won't get in the way of bats and things. I mean, it's LED lighting, it's that sort of thing that can be mounted on posts. That's exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, so somebody move that amendment, please. Councillor Taylor,
I'll move that amendment.
I think the officers have got the wording, and Councillor Evans.
I'm happy to second Councillor Taylor's amendment.
Jolly good. How good you are. Anybody wish to move? Anybody else wish to comment? Are you ready to vote? And if you vote, it will be in the respect of the amendment, which is to accept the officer's recommendation subject to that additional condition being introduced. Yeah? All those in favour? That's 8. Because B, yeah. All those against? The amendment is carried. So, anybody wish to move an additional amendment? Councillor Wade.
Could I move another amendment, Mr. Chair? I don't know if I can. That we look for an alternative location to put this site. I think if we'd have had the information that we've got this evening, if we'd have had that for the LDP, I don't think it would have even gone through the LDP. But that's.
I think the answer to that is no. If you're unhappy with the proposal as amended currently, then you vote against it when it comes to a substantive motion. But you can't amend simply by saying, look for another site, I'm afraid. Councillor Ashley.
Although I've voted for it, I think there's some feeling going up here, I detect, about the uneasiness about some of the aspects, risk assessment. Is there any way in which we can reflect that, please? Although I voted for it, it's some of the elements of this. Yeah. It's not my area even up here, but it's the risk assessment. It's been talked about, the road and the site itself. Is there any way in which we can reflect that?
Well, making those sorts of comments without actually having a proposition doesn't really help the matter. If you're unhappy, you vote against the substantive motion.
I'm not voting against it, I just want to reflect.
No, what I'm saying is, if your unhappiness is sufficient that you feel it's unsafe, then you vote against the proposal.
I'm not voting against it, I'm trying to reflect that some feeling.
Well, you need to come up with an amendment then. So are you able to come up with an amendment or not?
Can officers satisfy members that the objections there, I can't. Concerns that have been voiced in this report can be addressed? It's something around that. I can't think of a suitable word, to be honest.
It's not an appropriate one. Officers wouldn't put the recommendation to you unless they thought the concerns could be addressed.
Can I clarify that?
Yeah.
Sorry, Kat, I wasn't quite sure whether you were talking about just in relation to the roads or whether you were talking about the risks in terms of land instability and what. Now, the land instability,
issues, yeah.
If you look at condition 25, that's quite a comprehensive condition there that prior to them doing anything, they must satisfy us in terms of the risks of all those issues that include land instability. Now, that goes on to say about any further investigations that are required, so that condition would have to be complied with before they could proceed. So, from our point of view, I think the risks associated are dealt with there before any development will take place, and that will deal with the risk.
Okay. Right, we've got an amended position at the moment. The additional condition has been approved, but it needs to be set in context of the overall motion, which is to approve the report and the recommendations subject to that additional amendment. I'm now going to take a vote on that, unless anybody else wants to say anything or move a further amendment. No? Good. Okay. So all those in favour of the motion as amended, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 again. All those against, please show. 3. And a further amendment from you, Councillor Parish? Are you, sorry, not amendment, abstention?
I'm abstaining.
Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, so the motion as amended is carried. And that concludes our business. Thank you very much.